Hi everyone, welcome to the May 11th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we are going to do our usual recap of last weekend's races. We'll focus primarily on that stakes-laden card that they ran at Belmont on Saturday, topped by the Grade 1 Man of War, a really exciting edition of that race as Channel Cat just barely clawed his way to victory. We'll talk about that race as well as the four other graded stakes on that card. We'll also mention some racing from Churchill Downs, from Gulfstream, from Pimlico and Santa Anita. But before we get into that recap of the racing from last weekend, I think we do have to address the story that's really taken the entire horse racing world by storm the past couple of days, and that is the situation revolving around Bob Baffert and Medina Spirit testing positive for a classified substance in the Kentucky Derby. Before we start talking about it, I'll just lay down some basic facts as the basis for our discussion. On Sunday, you probably saw, unless you were living under a rock, that Bob Baffert announced that Medina Spirit tested positive for betamethasone in the amount of 21 picograms per milliliter of blood. That's a corticosteroid that's primarily used to treat inflammation, and it's a Class C drug in Kentucky. And Kentucky does have an absolute insurer rule in place, meaning that it's the trainer's responsibility. If a horse is found to be over the legal threshold for a medication, then the responsibility falls to the trainer no matter what excuse the trainer comes up with. So if that result is confirmed via split sample testing, which won't be ready probably for a few weeks to a month, then Medina Spirit in all likelihood will be disqualified from his Kentucky Derby win, and that would make Mandaloun the winner of the 147th Kentucky Derby. After issuing a series of denials on Monday, Baffert on Tuesday, today, as we're recording this, just now, admitted that the horse was administered betamethasone as an active ingredient in an ointment that the horse had been receiving for a skin infection. So that's the current story that we have as we're moving into discussing this now on Tuesday afternoon. And Craig, correct me if I forgot anything. I do have some questions for us to go through, but just where is your head at right now?
My head is I'm sick of this guy at this point, to just be frank. He's the past year, he's done nothing but bring a lot of negative publicity to the sport, and that's the last thing this sport needs. I mean, let's be honest, we're not exactly mainstream anymore. And, you know, there's a lot of people out to bring this sport down, and things like this aren't going to help. We got a big speech from Bob Baffert after his last bout of positives about how he was going to clean things up and make sure it never happens again. And now we get this excuse that he rubbed some cream on that anybody could find. I think it took Twitter about a picosecond to figure out that this ingredient is listed right on the label that allegedly caused the positive. I have no idea what to believe anymore. It seems like the story is changing hourly. And, you know, I just want to get past this stuff. And it's so frustrating to me as a guy that's followed this game for a long time. He's one of the top trainers in the game. This isn't Jason Service or Jorge Navarro, who were, you know, certainly good trainers, but they weren't winning Triple Crown races until Maximum Security almost won the Derby. But he is the face of our sport. And no matter how serious you think the allegations are, I know a lot of people are saying it's nothing. Bob Baffert certainly say it doesn't affect performance. The rules are in place for a reason, and you got to follow them. And if this excuse is true that he came up with 2 days after the fact, it's just total carelessness. How can this happen? I just don't know what to say anymore about it.
Yeah, and what you're getting at is one point I want to address, because people are kind of getting mired down in the details and the numbers, which I think are kind of difficult for a lot of people to grasp, because the layperson doesn't have any concept of what a picogram is, and 21 picograms of this drug. I think it's important to note that that is picograms per milliliter of the blood sample. It's not 21 picograms in the entirety of the horse's bloodstream. So I think that's an important point. And there are legal thresholds in place race in each of these states for a reason, because some studies have been done that these drugs at higher levels in the horse's system, they do affect performance at different levels. Obviously, this was a Class C drug, so it's not one of the most performance enhancing out there, but there is a threshold that was established for this drug, and it was actually lowered last year after Bob Baffert had this issue with the same drug, with gamine in the Kentucky Oaks. So there was no legal threshold for betamethasone at the time of Medina Spirit winning the Kentucky Derby. It was 0. So 21 is 21 picograms over the legal threshold. And I just feel like it's important to note that it's not something that you can just kind of talk your way out of because it's a number that's too small for people to grasp.
Yeah, and the part that I have trouble with is, I mean, these were horses at Kentucky. They were being monitored. How was cream rubbed on this horse that nobody knowed? Hopefully it's been reported and we'll find out that the excuse is true and it was just a stupid mistake. But it just makes you wonder, if this is supposedly the biggest race of the year and we have all the security, how could this happen the day before the race? You're exactly right about the 21 picograms. Obviously, there's a lot of spin going on out there, but as you said, the threshold is 0, and there's a reason they lowered it. It used to be 10 before the gamine positive. They changed it to none, and a lot of it's for the safety of the horse. If this drug is having an effect in your system, you're not supposed to run in it, not so much for performance, but for the safety, because it masks pain and it could cause horses to try to run through it. So there's a lot to it, and I just wish this guy'd get his act together, because as the face of the sport, you have to do better.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you made, that these legal thresholds in many cases are being lowered because it's been found that lowering these legal thresholds and not allowing these pain-masking drugs has reduced fatalities in the sport. And we have seen a trend where horse fatalities have been declining over the years. And that's one reason, because there's been better testing and tighter regulations on these drugs. And it's a real problem that Baffert has had these consistent problems over the past year with these positives. I mean, I could run through them. We had Charlatan and gamine testing positive for lidocaine back at Oaklawn last year. The Arkansas Derby was won by Charlatan before he was disqualified, and then that was reinstated. We won't get into all of the details of that, but you also had Murnith last summer at Del Mar testing positive for dextrorphan, gamine for this same drug in the Kentucky Oaks last year. So this is a pattern, and for a trainer that is supposed to be at the top of this sport, I mean, I don't really know what's worse. If he didn't know that the horse was given the drug, or if the horse was knowingly administered a medication that contained the drug. It's just kind of unfathomable that that level of carelessness would exist with a trainer that is at the apex of thoroughbred racing. And I know that there are other trainers out there who do not run their operations this way, who just are really tired of this situation and kind of have to roll their eyes because it hasn't been a level playing field. And the reason that we've gotten to this point is because the industry has not implemented a series of fines and penalties for trainers like this that are commensurate, number one, with the number of violations they've had in the past, and number two, with their purse earnings and the purses of the races in which these violations are found. I mean, you shouldn't be fining a trainer $1,000 for a $5,000 claiming race and the same $1,000 for $1 million grade 1 race. That doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't make sense to fine the trainer that has 5 horses the same as Bob Baffert, who's been probably in the finalists for the Eclipse Awards for the past 20 years. So I think that there need to be much stronger deterrence in the racing industry, and hopefully the passage of this Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act will be a step in that direction. But I still think there needs to be a lot more coordination among different racing jurisdictions to get some stricter fines in place to deter trainers from operating their business in a way that they're trying to always aim for something just below these legal thresholds, because that's how these mistakes happen.
Yeah. You said it good there. We definitely need more cooperation. I mean, it was like the Arkansas hearings. They had no idea about what happened in Del Mar and Churchill. It never came up, and that just doesn't seem right. There should be some repeat offender things where punishments and fines go up, it should be to the type of race, as you say, because, yeah, I mean, there's some incentive out there to cheat. People are always going to cheat when it comes to gambling, when it comes to winning money, that they're going to do it. So to deter it, you have to make it the punishment really fit the crime. And horse racing does a horrible job of that. I have no idea if it's going to change, if this new bill actually goes into play, which I think it will, and I hope it will. Time will tell. But whatever happens, it has to be better than what we have right now.
Yeah, and as far as the immediate aftermath of this, I think there are a couple discussions going on. I mean, one of those is obviously, should Medina Spirit be allowed to run in the Preakness? As of us recording this at about 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, I have not seen an announcement yet from Pimlico or Maryland racing officials about whether or not Medina Spirit's going to be allowed to run. I think the general assumption out there is that he will be allowed to run, and I think that it's natural to have a lot of mixed feelings about that because, I mean, if this news story is true, that Medina Spirit was being administered a topical cream containing betamethasone right up until the Friday before the Derby, I mean, that's problematic. But in addition to that, I mean, Churchill Downs banned Bob Baffert. And I mean, I know sometimes other jurisdictions will put in place a ban for just giving respect to other tracks that have done that. That's where the offense occurred. So it's difficult, but you've also got that situation where tracks have been a little bit capricious in the way that they've handled bans in the past. I mean, you could bring up the example of Santa Anita and Jerry Hollendorfer, where it never was really clear why or what the justification was for that. And we haven't got the split sample results back. So I think it's natural to have some mixed feelings about that. And I'm not really sure myself what the right way to adjudicate that right now is.
Yeah, it seems like suspensions are honored by other jurisdictions. Bans aren't. I know we have Wayne Potts winning races in New York while he's barred in other places. Jerry Hollendorfer's winning. So I think that's the difference between bans and suspensions. Now, when Baffert's suspended, inevitably, I would think this time then other tracks will honor that. As far as the Preakness, it's hard to imagine this horse is going to be allowed to run if it turns out this cream was applied the day before the Derby, and you would assume after, right? If he's been given it all the way from the Santa Anita Derby up through the Kentucky Derby, who knows when it stopped. So I don't know if he'd have to get tested again or not, but why would Pimlico want to risk this horse failing another drug test if he were to happen to win or place in the money in the Preakness? So I'll be curious to see how that turns out. At this point, given the news today, I'd be surprised if he shows up in the gate, but I guess we'll learn more later today.
Yeah, it's just all a nightmare. And I mean, looking at the Preakness field, there's a very high chance that he would win the Preakness if he ran. And that opens up a whole other can of worms with regard to what would happen for the Belmont Stakes, because it's unlikely this Kentucky Derby disqualification issue would be resolved until probably months after the Belmont, given the likely legal proceedings that are going to come. So, I mean, I just hope that the racing world doesn't have to face all of that, because it could be an ugly few weeks to months that we're about to enter into. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's something we have to talk about, because so often these issues, the news comes out too late after the fact, and there's really nothing to do about it. So, I mean, in one sense, it's good that we're finding out about it in real time, but still, this has been allowed to go on too long. So hopefully we do get some reforms that come out of this, because the backlash, and as far as other perceptions of racing outside of the core consciousness of racing fans and bettors and horsemen, it's really generated a negative view of the sport. So hopefully there are some changes that are put in place from this.
Yeah, and the sad thing, this is the second year in a row, well, third year in a row, actually, but I'm putting an asterisk next to last year, where the Preakness, there will be no Triple Crown, almost assuredly, because Mandaloun's not running. And if you assume that Medina Spirit's going to get disqualified, which I think is a really high percentage, we go back to Country House didn't make the Preakness. Now Mandaloun's not going to run in the Preakness. So kind of takes the excitement away from the race. Not as a bettor, because I'm sure it'll be a great betting card at Pimlico, and the race itself will be fine. But, I mean, we wait all year to see if somebody can win the Triple Crown, and now it's dashed within 2 weeks, third year in a row, really, for the Preakness.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, as somebody who picked Medina Spirit to win the Kentucky Derby, I feel for the people that bet on Mandaloun. And I mean, that's part of betting on races. You know, when you place your bets that regardless of how medication tests come back, the race is going to go official before that. So, I mean, if you placed your bet on Mandaloun, you knew that risk going in, but it still sucks. And it still reduces your confidence in betting on races in the future. So that's something that has to be dealt with. And there has to be something done to restore the confidence of the bettors, because they are the ones that keep this sport alive. So let's hope that a lot of change comes out of this really tricky and sad situation.
Yeah, last point on this for me, you make a really good point there. The Kentucky Derby is one day where we get a lot of people who might not watch another horse race all year, but it gives the opportunity for these people to become fans and to become bettors. And people who bet Mandaloun and are following along are highly unlikely to ever come back to the sport. So there are consequences when these kind of things happen.
Well, it's time to shift gears now, and we will look back rather than looking forward at last weekend's racing, beginning with some really nice performances and exciting races that we saw at Belmont Park last Saturday. And one of the most exciting races of the entire weekend was that main event on Saturday at Belmont, the Grade 1 Man of War, going 1 3/8 for the older runners on the turf. And Channel Cat, a horse who we've known for a long time in these marathon races, doesn't win that often, but he's often participating. They changed up the tactics, Jack Sisterson and the connections, and they put him on the front end here. It wasn't easy to get there because a lot of other riders had the same idea, but it seems like running on the front end is the way that this horse produces his best efforts, because he did not want to let anybody pass him at any point in this race.
Yeah, it's pretty rare to watch a race and think that the horse actually really wanted to win. It almost looked like he just stuck his head out and held it out at the wire to make sure he got there first. I know that's probably crazy. The horse can't see where the wire is, but it just had that look. And man, what a game effort from Channel Cat. As a guy who loves speed, I will root for this horse every single time if he keeps that up, because it's clearly how this horse runs best. All you have to do is look through his lifetime PPs, see what his good races are, and they're when he's on or near the lead. And it didn't matter that the pace was fast. I know on Twitter I had said I had some questions when I saw, I think it was a 22 and change opening quarter, just because we never see that anymore. Granted, there was a big push for the lead, and it turned out it was fine. And it also showed me that speed isn't the death sentence that a lot of riders and trainers seem to believe on turf. You can win a lot of races. I watched a lot of races at Belmont this week, as I'm sure you did, where some really big long shots went out, set fast paces, and they didn't win, but they held on for second, held on for a good third. So it's really good to see a horse use their speed, and I hope it continues a little bit. I'm doubtful, but it was a nice effort. 122 speed figure from Channel Cat. I don't want to take too much away from Gufo, who was game in defeat. He proved that he's taken a step forward as an older horse at a distance he had never run before. And I think he proved he's going to be a threat as well for the rest of the year. So pretty solid turf race. I mean, they weren't huge speed figures. They're not Breeders' Cup type speed figures, but it was a solid grade 1 for me.
No, I agree with you about Channel Cat's gameness. I mean, if you could have placed a bet with about 10 strides to go on who was going to win this race, I think Gufo would have been 1-9, because it looked like he was rolling by Channel Cat. I mean, you know where that finish line is at Belmont Park, having watched a lot of races there, and with Joel Rosario on his back, you just figured that he had timed it perfectly, and Channel Cat just dug in and held him off. I mean, he got the best of a bob. Gufo might have had his body slightly in front of the wire, but as you said, Channel Cat just stuck his head out and basically clawed his way to victory. So, I mean, a really nice performance from him. And as you were saying, I mean, my eyes definitely popped out of my head a little bit at that opening quarter, but you look at the pace figures of this race and it kind of makes sense they were going at that fast when you look at the pace figure line of Gufo, who has kind of the typical pace figure line of a closer in a fast-paced race. He was just so far behind those leaders who kind of went nuts in the opening quarter of this race to open up such an advantage on the rest of the field, and you can see where they finished. I mean, the horse that was really going after Channel Cat in the early going, Field Pass, he faded to last. So it was a nice performance from Channel Cat, and I would have to think that the connections are going to realize at this point this is the way this horse does his best running. So they have to send him to the front in future starts. So I like to see that, and it definitely adds some pace to some of these grade ones that we could see later in the year if he's ridden that way in the future. So he's just an interesting player in this division off this performance.
Yeah, and as the pace goes, I'll add, if this was a race with blue fractions and those horses were in the same exact spots with, half a furlong to go, or as you said, 10 strides to go, I would say 99 times out of 100 Gufo gets up. But, you sap the kick of these closers. Even though he was far back, he was 14 lengths back earlier, I'd almost guarantee he was going a lot faster than he normally does in his races, and that kick's just not quite as effective. So, I'm a speed guy, so more speed for me. I do want to highlight Johnny Velasquez. He is a guy who we saw in the Kentucky Derby, and I feel bad for him in that situation, as obviously he has nothing to do with it, but he is not afraid to use speed, and that guy is a real true ambassador for the sport, and I love seeing him win these big races.
Yeah, he took no prisoners on the front end, and sometimes that's the way you have to do it to win these races with a horse that wants that forwardly placed trip. Moving on to another turf race that we saw on Saturday at Belmont Park. That was the Grade 3 Beaugay, the local prep for the New York Stakes. I believe that's a Grade 2 event that's going to be run during the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival. And in this one, we saw the return of Harvey's Little Goyle, a really nice filly from last year when she was a 3-year-old. She won the Grade 1 QE2 Cup. She was third in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. And it seems like she might have taken a step forward as she kicked off her 4-year-old campaign here, as she got the job done by a half length over the very intriguing European import Lamista.
Yeah, I thought this was a strong race, run completely the opposite of the other one we just talked about. All the fractions were in blue. We got a 26 opening quarter. I mean, it was pretty painful to watch, but the top two ran very well. I mean, that said, they absolutely flew home. Harvey's Little Goyle obviously had the tactical advantage, was able to maintain that to the wire. But I thought Lamista was every bit as impressive as her. First time in the country for Chad Brown. Was able to close down most of that 4-length gap she had early despite the slow pace. And the top two got some serious speed figures. Obviously boosted because of the pace from us, but Harvey's Little Goyle, 128, Lamista, 127, and then a big gap to third and fourth where Platinum Painter and Nay Lady Nay ran their usual figures in the mid to upper one teens. So I don't think the figures are over-exaggerated here. I thought it was two pretty big efforts from the top two, and I'm expecting big things from both of them going forward.
Yeah, I was really impressed by the performances from the top two here. I'm a big fan of Harvey's Little Goyle, as you know. I think we both are. We've talked about her quite a bit on this show, racing on both dirt and turf. It seems like she's taken her game to the next level on turf, so I imagine they're going to stick with that surface for most of this season. In a lot of her races last year, she had kind of used her versatility and tactical speed to her advantage, and she did that here, but she showed a turn of foot that I hadn't seen from her that much last year, where she really sprinted home at the end of this race, opening up from the rest of the field, opening up on everybody except Lamista, who I was really impressed by her as well. Her U.S. debut for Chad Brown, she was the only one making up ground at the end of this race. I was looking up some of the closing splits in Trackus. She ran her final quarter mile in 22 flat, which is basically as fast as you're going to see at the very end of a route race. So she's a really exciting horse moving forward and seems like one that could go a little farther than a mile and a 16th. Actually, both of these do have been successful going as far as a mile and a quarter in the past. So they both should be exciting players in this division moving forward. I guess the disappointment in this race, if there was one, was Civil Union, who just never really got in a position to be successful. She was kind of 3 to 4 wide all the way around the track. Feels like maybe she wasn't fully cranked up and this was just a prep.
Yeah, and I believe you said on the forecast you thought she was a horse who was probably going to want more distance, so that definitely makes sense. And last thing for me on this, I talked about the pace and how it was an advantage to Harvey's Little Goyle, but she's the kind of horse who has that tactical speed that can take advantage of it. She's not a horse who's always up front. In the Breeders' Cup, Filly and Mare Turf, she was pretty far back and was able to make a nice run to get a close third. So I don't want it to sound like I'm disparaging her at all. I thought she ran absolutely huge, and tactical speed is a weapon. But yeah, these top two for me, I'm really looking forward to seeing them the rest of the season.
The 3-year-olds were in action in the Grade 3 Peter Pan on that Man o' War undercard on Saturday at Belmont Park, and this one was reduced a little bit by the scratch of the horse that was likely going to be favored in risk-taking. He's going to run in the Preakness instead, but Promise Keeper for Todd Pletcher, a horse that had very impressively won an allowance race at Keeneland coming into this, validated that effort with another nice performance here to take down the Peter Pan.
Yeah, it was a good effort. He backed up the race we saw at Keeneland. He got a 110 TimeformUS speed figure. He had run a 112 at Keeneland, and his final time was actually a 112 here. The pace was pretty moderate. We have the 3/4 coded in blue as slow, but he was clearly the best horse. I still think he's got a ways to go before he could step up into bigger races. Like maybe, I'm not sure if he is being pointed for a race like the Travers, but he'd have several lengths to make up. But I don't want to knock the performance. It was solid. Nova Rags ran basically the same race he ran in the Florida Derby. So this, for me, not the strongest Peter Pan, but these guys will need to take steps forward to be players in the division, but they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, I would imagine they'll move on to the Belmont Stakes, a race that Todd Pletcher has had a lot of success in the past, usually with horses that are coming out of the Kentucky Derby, but he's run some coming out of the Peter Pan that have done well also. I think Commissioner was in that position when he was second to Tonalist in that Belmont Stakes a few years ago. And Promise Keeper, he seems like one that shouldn't mind added ground. He's the son of Constitution, who's got this massive stride on him. And it's funny to watch him come through the stretch because he really extends his stride out beyond where you see most horses on the dirt run. I mean, he's just got a long, loping way of going. But he's going to have to run faster, obviously, to be competitive against the 3-year-olds that we saw compete in the Kentucky Derby. So we'll see if he's able to take that step forward.
Yeah, I don't know how the Belmont slipped my mind. I jumped right to the Travers, especially with a guy like Todd Pletcher. But I'm really hoping he runs Malathot there because I think she'd be a much stronger contender than him.
The first of the stakes that we saw on Saturday at Belmont Park was the Grade 3 Run Happy, one of 2 sprints on that card. This one was for the older male horses, and the venerable horse Firenze Fire, who's pretty much been a mainstay in the sprint division for the past few seasons. He got another victory here, winning the Run Happy for the second time. He had also run it all the way back in 2019 when he was in the barn of Jason Service, but he's held this form well for Kelly Breen. Doesn't always win these races, but he's usually right there at the end, and seems like he's pretty much right in the conversation with everybody else that's considered top sprinter at this point in 2021.
Yeah, I've mentioned before, I've become a fan of this horse just because he survived the Jason Service barn and he's still plugging along, still winning races. He got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure. He didn't do it the easy way either. Chateau, who has popped some big races, was loose on the lead, on a clear lead, and he was just able to wear him down. And it's not like Chateau quit. He hung on for second. This wasn't the strongest field, and for me as a speed figure maker, one of the more perplexing things of the last couple of years is how slow our older male dirt sprinters have been. So I'm still looking for some maybe 3-year-olds to take a step up. We have some 4-year-olds who we haven't seen who ran some fast speed figures last year. Nashville comes to mind, but he's obviously got issues. But yeah, I just keep waiting for a breakout performance, and it's not coming. And until it does, a horse like Firenze Fire is just going to keep winning.
Yeah, this was a nice effort from him. As you said, I mean, he did have to chase down Chateau. Chateau is the kind of horse that has a tendency to kind of stop at the end of his races and let anybody else who wants to pass him do so. So I don't want to give him too much credit for that. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Firenze Fire was just better than this field. I mean, the waters will get a little deeper when he tries Grade 1 company, probably in his next few starts. But I'm not sure how much deeper based on some of the Grade 1s that we've seen in this sprint division so far, so I agree with you. I think he's very much in the conversation as one of the top sprinters in the country right now. The other sprint graded stakes that we saw on Saturday at Belmont was the Grade 3 Vagrancy for the fillies and mares, and this one didn't come back quite as fast as the Run Happy, as Victim of Love, who was making her second start of the year, got back to some of the form that we saw from her in New York last year, where she actually won this race back in 2020 before finishing third in the Grade 1 Ballerina at Saratoga, and she got back to her winning ways here, but I'm not sure that she was beating the strongest field.
No, I mean, we had talked about this race. It didn't look that strong on paper. The fact Pacific Gale was going to be the favorite kind of pointed that out. And it got a 110 for the winner, Victim of Love, Sadie Lady a 109. Pacific Gale definitely had an excuse back in third. She was only beaten, I think, about a total of 2 lengths, and she had a terrible start. The pace wasn't overly fast, so she very well may have been the best horse in here, but breaking from the gate, so some of that goes to the horse too, so I don't want to completely dismiss it. So not the strongest grade three we're going to see, not the most unpredictable race. I think we were all over the top two on our show, so nothing to get too excited about for me. It was a grade three, and I think that's the kind of performance we got.
Yeah, and unlike in the male division among the older sprinters, there are some much better female sprinters out there, like Gamine, like Kamari, so I'm not going to put Victim of Love in that class quite yet. She's going to have to run faster in some future starts. On Sunday at Belmont Park, the feature race was another sprint on the dirt. That was the Gold Fever for the 3-year-olds, a 6-furlong prep for the Woody Stevens on Belmont Stakes Day. Not sure that any of these horses are quite good enough to really have a say in the outcome of the Woody Stevens, but I thought it was an exciting race to watch as Baron for Butch Reed coming in from Parks just got the better of Candyman Rocket, who was turning back out of some Derby preps.
Yeah, this turned out for me to be a pretty quick race. I haven't checked anybody else's speed figures. I gave it a 115. I did break it out from all the other dirt races, but that's not particularly unusual when it's surrounded by turf races like this one was. So I'll definitely keep an eye on it. It would have come back much, much slower if I used the variant from all the other races. But it looked really consistent for all the horses in the field, so I don't expect it to come back as a slow race. And the gap back to third would kind of add some proof to that. Obviously, you can't prove something like a speed figure, but it was a big gap. These two put on pretty good show to the wire, and I think they're going to be pretty decent sprinters.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Baron, the winner of this race. I had liked him when he made his New York debut in the Bayshore last time. He was probably never beating the winner of that race drain the clock anyway, but he lost all chance at the start when he stumbled really badly and basically fell to his face. And for a horse that wants to be forwardly placed, I mean, that's as bad as it gets coming out of the gate. So I could just draw a line through that performance. And he had run some nice speed figures in his prior races at Parks. Those numbers totally held up when you looked at the competition. And he took that form to New York here for his second attempt at a stakes race at Naira. And Candyman Rocket, I thought he had no excuse. Coming to the 8th pole, it seemed like he had the race won, and it just feels like Candyman Rocket is the kind of horse that has a lot of natural speed, but he lacks a little bit of heart, and he just kind of gave it up at the end, and Manny Franco, who was really persevering through the lane on Baron, just nailed him at the finish line. And I like the pedigree a lot on the winner of this race, because if you look at it, he's not by a sire that a lot of people know. Wygelia has not had a lot of top-level progeny, but he was a really nice sprinter who competed primarily in Florida, also shipped around the country, won $1 million going back to the mid to early 2000s. And his dam, Silmaril, was an excellent horse who competed in stakes races on the Maryland circuit. I think she won 16 of 36 starts. She also earned over $1 million. So just cool to see the mating of two kind of regional millionaire stars produce this horse.
Yeah, and I would like to say, as far as the runner-up, I really do hope they keep Candyman Rocket sprinting. I know he won the Davis earlier in the year, one of those early Derby points preps, but I thought he ran well. I know he did kind of give it up, but I like you, think Baron is a pretty darn good horse, so nothing to be embarrassed about. And he ran much the best career best TimeformUS speed figure in this spot, so I think we'll see him more in these sprinting spots going forward.
One race from last week at Belmont that came up surprisingly fast, at least for me, kind of knowing the horses going in, was the second race on Thursday, a maiden special weight going 6 furlongs for the fillies and mares. That was won by first-time starter Bella Sofia for Rudy Rodriguez. And this filly just ran off from the field to win by 11 1/4 lengths. And the TimeformUS speed figure of 110 is pretty impressive for a 3-year-old in her debut.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, we're still just in May. These are pretty young 3-year-olds. I think she was an April foal, so she had just turned third by by the time, just turned 3 by the time this race was run. And yeah, 110 is a pretty darn good number. And she beat a horse, a stablemate actually, in back channel, who had been running for different connections before this one, but who had run a steady stream of high 90s and 100 type TimeformUS speed figures. So I don't think it was any fluke. I guess the bettors were caught by surprise on this one. I haven't checked the workout reports to see what it said, but whatever they said, she ran better than him, even if it was an A, because this was a big effort from her.
Yeah, it's funny. I looked up the workout reports that you can find on DRF.com after this race, and they were actually pretty positive on Bella Sofia, but she still didn't take that much money because it kind of felt like she was only in the race to make it go for her stablemate Back Channel, who was bet down to 3-5, as you said, based off those superior speed figures. But Back Channel just didn't go on with her form off the trainer switch to Rudy Rodriguez, and Bella Sofia, she established herself as the one to follow coming out of this race. I don't think there was much behind her because, as I said, Back Channel didn't show up, and the others in the race just really hadn't shown much quality before. So that remains to be seen if there was anything of note behind her. But still, she ran the race that she ran, and it was fast. So I'm excited to see what she does in the future. And looking at her pedigree, it's kind of obscure because she's by Awesome Patriot, who is a sire that I didn't know too much about. He's one that was standing in Ohio when he was bred to Bella Sofia's mare. He was a minor winner of a stakes race, the Alley Dar, back at, I think, Hollywood Park a number of years ago, but I had kind of forgotten about him. So just an odd, low-profile pedigree and a horse that really didn't attract much attention before making this pretty eye-catching debut. Another maiden winner from last week at Belmont was a 2-year-old from Sunday, and that was Twilight Gleaming, a European, actually Irish-bred horse that had made her debut at Keeneland on the dirt. But see, she switched over to turf here, which definitely seems like it's the surface that she's meant for, and she was pretty visually impressive winning this 5-furlong race.
Yeah, she was, and she got a nice TimeformUS speed figure. It's a 101. We did give it a note that it's full of lightly raced and first-time starters, and it was also run at the pretty rarely used 5-furlong distance. I think they only use it for these 2-year-olds. But luckily, there was a 1-mile race. It's basically around one turn at Belmont on this same configuration, and I've used it before. I used that fact before when I make these speed figures, so I don't have any real problem with that 101. I think it'll turn out to be pretty solid. She had only run a 70 in her debut, but as you said, that was on dirt. She was probably much more bred for this surface, so there was another race on the card as well for, I think it was for males, which was not as fast as this one, so impressive performance from her for me.
Yeah, and this horse, given the time that she won this race, seems like the perfect candidate for Wesley Ward to take over to Royal Ascot. I know sometimes he has horses switching from dirt to turf when he competes in those stakes races overseas. This one actually has the prep in on the turf, so you know that she could be meant for those races if she continues to do well over the next month. I assume that he is taking another string over there. He has for the past several years, so she seems like one that could be pretty tough, given how precocious she appears to be in May of her 2-year-old season next month in June over in England. Let's move on to some other venues. Churchill Downs ran no stakes races last week. Well, actually one that was a turf sprint that we're not going to talk about because it came up pretty slow, but a couple of allowance races that I think are worth mentioning. One was from Saturday, as we saw Crystal Ball, probably one of the last Bob Baffert trained runners that we'll see compete at Churchill for a little while. She was grade 1 placed last year in the Coaching Club American Oaks, was off for a long time after disappointing in the Alabama. We talked about her return race at Santa Anita last month, and she made her second start off the layoff here as the heavy favorite. She got the job done as the odds-on choice, but didn't exactly win the way you want to see an odds-on favorite do so.
No, I think she actually got passed at one point in the upper stretch. She did fought back, won by a length and a half, and maybe part of that was a bit of an illusion because the pace was really slow. And if you watch it, Florent Giroux never really looked too panicked. I think he thought he had the race in hand all the way, and he did. That said, she got a 111 TimeformUS speed figure. Because of that pace, it's bumped up a bit. All the horses got bumped up because it was so slow. All the fractions are in blue. Her final time figure was actually only a 102. And even with the bump up from pace, you'll see almost all the horses ran a lower figure than they had the last time out. So I'm not sure I want to put a whole lot of stock in the speed figure for this race. Maybe she has more in the tank, but it's just really hard to say when the pace is that slow.
Yeah, just the optics of this race were kind of negative for me. I mean, she looked like she was out of horse on the far turn. The jockey really had to get into her to make her run in the stretch, and you don't always love to see that. A horse that kind of isn't doing it on their own has to really be asked by the rider. She did eventually turn away Market Rumor, the runner-up, who looked like she had the race won coming to the quarter pole, so credit to her for coming through in the end, but this is not the kind of performance that I want to see from a horse that likely was going to step up in an integrated stakes company next time. She'd have to run much faster based on the two races that we've seen from her as a 4-year-old to be competitive against some of the top fillies and mares out there. Moving on to another allowance race from the Sunday card, going that same mile and a 16th distance. This one for the males, and it was won by the Claiborne Farm-owned Sprawl, a horse that had been with Bill Mott last year, but now he's being campaigned by Tom Drury as a 4-year-old, and he was coming off that blanket finish loss in the Ben Ally at Keeneland, got a bit of class relief here, and he really came through, winning off impressively by about 7 lengths.
Yeah, he did, and he got a 116 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. I mean, it was a really solid, basically the same number he had run last time in that Ben Ally, and solid effort. I'm not sure where he goes from here. That's a figure that could win a grade 3 kind of stakes race, so I imagine stakes races will be back on his plans. He's certainly moving in the right direction. This was a career best for the second race in a row, so maybe he's got some improvement in him.
Yeah, I did see some chatter online saying that maybe there was a rail bias at Churchill Downs with that sloppy track on Sunday. And just looking through the charts and watching the last few races, I could see it. Some horses that rode the rail, especially late in the day, did seem to really take a step forward and just kind of ride that rail to victory. So I understand, and maybe that's the explanation for why Sprawl won this race so dominantly over what was a decent field. That said, he's a horse that had shown some promise in the past, and like you said, he was coming off a good performance, so it's not like this race came out of nowhere. So he's one that definitely is worth keeping an eye on moving forward.
Well, that said, I should bring up when I did the speed figures, my default is when I start, I try to use the same variant for all the races and look through and see how it looks for everybody. And when I did that, the race we just talked about and the race we're about to talk about came up really, really fast. So I kind of went back and looked and redid it where I used a different variant for those last 2 races. And it sounds like it kind of matches the visual that you got watching. Over a sloppy track, it's not unusual at all for a track to change like that, and it just made the figures fit a whole lot better for these last 2 races. Otherwise, we'd have been talking about I did skip a Sprawl. I was looking at ethical judgment, but we'd be talking about Sprawl running like a 128 TimeformUS speed figure, and I just don't think that's realistic. Even given the 7-length margin of victory, it would have still given Thirst for Life a lifetime best speed figure while getting drubbed back in second. So I think these numbers are pretty spot on, and it might lend credence to that bias you were talking about. We don't give track biases when the track condition's changing. I don't remember if that was what was happening on this day or if it was sloppy all day, but it certainly sounds like it matched.
Yeah, and I don't have a whole lot to say about the next race, the race that occurred right after Sprawl won. That was a 3-year-old allowance race going the same distance that was won by ethical judgment. I mostly just kind of sent in these 2 races to talk about because you hadn't gave me the speed figures yet, and I wasn't sure how fast they were going to come up for all the reasons that you said. They appeared faster than the context of the day, but obviously, ethical judgment ended up running a number that makes a good amount of sense for his prior form, and he was another horse that rode the rail much of the way, so I'm not sure that I would view this as impressive a performance as the raw time might have suggested.
Yeah, he wound up with a 109 speed figure, which is still the best. He was coming out of a race where he ran second to Folsom, who went on to win the Oaklawn Stakes on closing day there on Kentucky Derby Day. So he's a solid enough 3-year-old, but nobody I'm going to expect to make any big dents. He could be a horse that shows up in races like the Ohio Derby, the Oklahoma Derby, things like that, but he's not a grade 1, 2, 3 type of horse right now.
Moving on to the next venue, which is Gulfstream Park. They ran one stakes there last Saturday. That was the English Channel for the 3-year-olds on the turf. I believe this is actually the race that was won by Guffaw last year. I think that was his first stakes win. Obviously, the quality of some of those stakes races at Gulfstream last year in the springtime was buoyed a little bit by the pandemic situation, where a lot of trainers of top turf runners kept their horses at Gulfstream for a long time, longer than they normally would, before shipping up to Kentucky and New York. Not the case this year, so this race probably not of the same quality as we saw last year. But still, the winner of this race, yes, this time, had been on a nice little winning streak at Gulfstream, and while this race might not have come back that fast, the trip that this horse got suggested that he was much the best.
Yeah, it's funny when you sent this, I kind of went looking for the speed figure and realized somehow I forgot to make speed figures for Gulfstream on Saturday, so I had to hurry up and go do that this morning. He got a 103. It's his 4th win in a row. I think it's his 5th win in 6 turf tries. So that's something you have to consider. On turf, it's not all that unusual for horses just to run fast enough and doing what they have to do to win. So I wouldn't be surprised if this horse had a 110, 112 type speed figure in him. I'm not talking about he could step in and suddenly run 115s or 120s at this point in his career. But he's certainly shown a will to win, and I know you wanted to talk about his trip, so I'll let you talk about that some more.
Yeah, he's kind of a funny horse with really no established running style. He's won on the turf coming from mid-pack. A couple of his victories on the turf this past winter at Gulfstream came in gate-to-wire fashion, leading all the way. This was his 4th victory in a row, so he clearly does love to win races. But boy, he had every excuse not to win this one, because coming out of the gate, he kind of got squeezed back a little bit. He was last by a few lengths coming under the wire the first time. And his rider, who I don't know as a very experienced turf rider, started his move at about the half-mile pole, which typically is ill-advised on the turf. He went 4 to 5 wide all the way around the far turn, basically struck the lead at the quarter pole, and typically a horse that makes a premature move like that is going to have nothing left for the stretch drive, especially when you've got a horse like King of Dreams, who had been setting a pretty moderate pace up front, but he battled back really well through the lane to get by that horse and win it. Just a horse that, even though he only won by 3/4 of a length, he was much the best.
Yeah, and you made a good point about the difference between last year and this year. Just something it doesn't really have much to do with what we're talking about, but amazing how far we've come in a year's time, given where we were at this point last year.
Moving on to the penultimate venue we're going to visit on this show, that is Pimlico, where they're going to run the Preakness this upcoming weekend. No major stakes action last week, but on their Saturday card, where they did get a lot of rain and had a sloppy track, we did see a nice performance from Galerio, who won an allowance race, I believe in the 8th race there on Saturday. And this is just a really cool horse, one that seems to show up all the time. He's almost always in the exacta, and he dominated a decent field here.
Yeah, you're not exaggerating. His record, this was his 24th start. He's been first or second 20 times, and he always seems to run similar speed figures. He's a 5-year-old. He's been improving, but it's been really gradual. He's moved from the 80s to the 90s to the low hundreds, and now he seems to be running in the mid-teens. He got a 116 TimeformUS speed figure for this effort. His best to date. So yeah, just a really cool horse. I mean, these are the kind of horses we don't often talk about them as, when they don't run in stakes races, which he's running a few smaller ones, got a few seconds. I didn't scroll through his whole career to see if he's ever won one, but these are the kind of horses I really like to latch on to and follow along and hope he's around for a while.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to look at his entire record, because since he broke his maiden back in February of 2020, which is not that long ago, he's run 15 times, been first 9 times, second 6 times. So that's 15 consecutive exacta finishes. That's just something you rarely see in this day and age, especially in the span of just over a year. So a really neat horse, and one that, as you said, he's not going to be winning a bunch of stakes races, probably never even going to compete in graded stakes races, but just a regional horse that's worth being aware of, because he shows up every time with a strong effort.
Yeah, and I looked it up while you were talking. He has not won a stakes race. He had 3 consecutive seconds. It does look like he's eligible for some Maryland-bred stakes races, so I'm going to be rooting for him to get one, because, yeah, he's the kind of horse I can get behind.
Let's close things out on this podcast with talking about a couple races from last week at Santa Anita. One of those that was graded was Saturday's Grade 3 Santa Barbara, going 1.5 miles. And the winner of this race, Neige Blanche, really had to fight for it, as for a 12 furlong race, this one was desperately close at the wire as Ride for the Cause burst through at about the 8th pole. Looked like she might be on her way to victory, but Neige Blanche, kind of like Channel Cat in the Man of War, just got her head down on the wire at the right time.
Yeah, she was a horse I chased a few times when she showed up in the States, and she was never able to get the job done. But she finally got her win here. She did it with just a 110 TimeformUS speed figure, so not the greatest kind of speed figure that we're going to see. The one thing that caught my eye in here is it was a turf race that wasn't won by a Phil D'Amato or Richard Baltas, so it was good to see that for Leonard Powell to win one of these graded stakes races. Not sure where she's going to go from here, because 110s are not going to win a lot of graded stakes races, even in California.
No, and I feel like that's kind of the theme of this show. We're not talking about a lot of horses that are going to be winning Breeders' Cup races down the line, but there were still some exciting performances and some really gutsy performances, and I think we saw that here from Neige Blanche, who, I mean, based on her trip, she was never on the rail. She was about 2 to 3 wide the entire way. Looked like she had lost the race coming to the 16th pole, but she battled back and was able to win it over Ride for the Cause, who is another one of these horses that had really come to hand at Woodbine last year, and her first couple of performances in Southern California, unlike some others who've made that move, like Charmaine's Mia and Say the Word and Count Again, well, she hadn't been quite as successful, but she got back on track here, stretching back out in distance, and was able to run a pretty good second.
Yeah, the one upside I'd say for Neige Blanche was that her best race overseas had come at a 1.375. She'd been running shorter here, only running 1.25 miles, so maybe this 1.5 miles is what she's really wanted all along.
We'll finish things up on this podcast with the other stakes race from Sunday at Santa Anita. That is the Franz Valentine going a mile on the turf for the fillies and mares. I believe the California-bred fillies and mares. And Legs Galore, who had looked unstoppable on turf up until her last start when she lost as the favorite. Well, they stretched her out in distance to a mile for the first time. And it turns out she's more than just a sprinter, because she was able to fend them all off going this 2-turn distance.
Yeah, this is one I don't have the official speed figures for, but my quick take looking at the worksheet is it's going to be a fast race. It's going to be about a 120 speed figure, something she have run a couple times, couple races back, going 6 furlongs in a similar Calbred stake. And it just shows that speed's dangerous. It was her first time going long, as you say, and she handled it just fine. The pace was honest. It wasn't like she set a slow pace out there. I don't have the exact pace figures in front of me, but just looking at the flow, the race actually slowed down gradually just a little bit. So she looks like a horse who's going to be pretty dangerous at this distance if she can keep running 120 speed figures. That will win a lot of races in California, even outside of the Calbreds.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out, the runner-up in this race, Warren's Showtime, I mean, she's no slouch. She's a California bred who was coming off a couple of Grade 2 placings, finishing within 2 lengths of Charmaine's Mia, who's arguably the best horse competing in Southern California on the turf among the fillies and mares right now. So she ran her race here. Legs Galore was just a little bit quicker than her. I feel like Legs Galore is probably a more natural sprinter than a router, but being able to go a mile, it definitely gives options, especially in these California-bred races where a horse of this quality is always going to be tough. Well, that's it for the podcast this week. Unlike Derby week, we've got a little bit less going on this week, so we will be able to record a TimeformUS forecast on Friday, and I assume we'll be taking a look at most of the Preakness card that day. We'll see how those races come up. We'll focus quite a bit on the undercard, I would imagine, talking about some of the multi-race sequences, so that's something to look forward to when we record that on Friday. Remember, you can always listen to both of these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. So thanks for tuning in to the TimeformUS Pacecast today, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast, the Preakness edition, coming up on Friday.